How a Romance Novel Saved the Galaxy by Ariana de Rote. Chapter 79. Quinlan. Touching Deathwatch's stuff was exactly as much fun as Quinlan thought it would be. He was very appreciative that Deppa had found him a bunk on the ship back so he could try to sleep off the worst of the fanaticism and violence which were echoing in his head. Sadly, he also hadn't found out much. All he knew now was that the other Deathwatch base was in space rather than on a planet's surface. While that ruled out some places, it meant the Deathwatch were likely mobile and could be in any number of inhabited and uninhabited systems along the Perlimian trade route. Judging by the way the handsome Mandalore's son had cursed when told the news, he knew that it would be like finding a needle in a haystack. Quinlan and Deppa had left the man to his cursing. Apparently, they were going to hitch a ride with Fett's task force to meet up with Thalme, so they had a day or two before they were leaving. Deppa had offered for him to rest in his quarters, but there was no chance of Quinlan doing that when he found out she was visiting Clan La and Obi-Wan. Contrary to what numerous people seem to believe, Quinlan was not a mindless producer of spontaneous chaos. Oh no, he thought long and hard about the chaos he brought with him. It was just that 9 times out of 10 he weighed the consequences and realized the punishment was totally worth it. Granted, he didn't think nearly so much about the things he said out loud, but he had taken the time to consider if he should censor himself on Mandalore, and decided that with the Mandalorians' secret love of kids and Jedi, he was totally fine to basically say whatever he wanted while on planet. Here's the point. "This is my mother, Lillian," said Obi-Wan. "Oh, hey!" Quinlan waved. "I think our Kiffer clans are mortal enemies. Nice to meet you." There was a pregnant pause before the woman burst into laughter. "Nice to meet you, too!" "Quinlan!" Obi-Wan groaned. Master Windu's groan joined him. "Wow! Master Windu has the exact same tone! You're becoming more alike already!" said Quinlan cheerfully. For all it was a joke, Obi-Wan did perk up at the reference to his master like Quinlan knew he would. It was nice to see his friend finally get the Jedi Master he deserved. When he had first seen 12-year-old Obi-Wan miserably trying to meditate in the Room of 1,000 Fountains sometime last year, he'd been compelled to try to cheer the boy up. It had taken all of Quinlan's charisma to cajole Obi-Wan into joining him in a prank at the temple. As expected, they had had a blast pulling it. Quinlan had appropriated the thick flimsy used to discreetly label all the species in the Room of 1,000 Fountains. The small cards on little placards were then relabeled with the most silly names he and Obi-Wan could come up with. The room was huge, so it had taken them a few days of work, and Quinlan was sure if they had been caught, those signs would have been up for many days without correction. Unfortunately, as often happened when you lived in a temple full of telepaths, on the last day they ran into Master Korob, who, like many Ithorians, enjoyed gardening. The punishment had been some of Quinlan's lightest ever, simply collecting all the fake cards, but Master Korob's sign language had mentioned this looking bad for an initiate trying to find a master, and Obi-Wan had avoided Quinlan ever since. Of course, Obi-Wan couldn't avoid him right now, since Deppa was refusing to let Quinlan out of her sight, but also wanted to be introduced to her new Mandalorian relatives, as well as get to know her new Padawan brother. Quinlan also wanted to spend time with Obi-Wan and enjoyed getting Master Windu to make that constipated face, so it was a win-win. "We're lucky the clan kids are at school, or else we'd be mobbed," Obi-Wan whispered to him. "This isn't a mob!" Quinlan asked back. He was seated next to Obi-Wan, who was seated next to his father, who was seated next to Master Windu. Deppa was on the opposite side of the big table, where all the members of Clan La would eat or meet. Every inch of space around them was filled with adult Mandalorians, most of whom had their attention on Knight Deppa. Not because she was saying anything interesting, in Quinlan's opinion, she was just answering basic questions about the Jedi, but probably because she was the only romantically available Jedi. "Bo," said Obi-Wan, tugging on his father's sleeve. The man looked over and seemed to realize how uncomfortably crowded they were. Quinlan could just barely hear him say, "Go, I'll hold him off." He and Obi-Wan were able to scramble away, though not with one last stare of, "You better behave," from Deppa across from them. "Do you want to meet the Strill?" asked Obi-Wan once they were behind the crowd in some sort of courtyard. "Yes!" Obi-Wan was headed through a corridor on the opposite side of the courtyard. After a minute, they came out in a room smelling of plaster and dust. The walls were freshly painted white. To Quinlan's right was a sort of stone table with a big slab of rock balancing on two others on either side. Underneath the table was the Strill, curled up and eyes closed.
Looks a bit like a mastiff, only with more legs and not a reptile.
More legs, not a reptile. I'm definitely calling you when next I study galactic biology, said Obi-Wan.
Quiet, you!
It was a bit of a confusing mishmash of creatures to look at. The golden fur and head looked closer to a loth wolf.
Is the fur soft?
Obi-Wan shook his head.
Rough and prickly. They're sleeping a lot right now because the medics say they'll give birth soon.
Isn't the Strill a she?
All Strill can give birth and impregnate other Strills, so I think they is more appropriate. But Mandoa doesn't have genders, so I've heard my clan use he, she, and they for the Strill. Their name is Chava, by the way. It means rough, and is part of the phrase Chava Sasheb's Bistrili, which translates to rough as a Strill's backside.
A bit literal,
said Quinlan.
I think it's a joke, said Obi-Wan, because the adults grin whenever they say it. But I don't understand Mandoa well yet. And maybe they're just happy to see the Strill. They thought wild Strill were extinct in this region.
At that moment, Chava opened their eyes. They looked tired, but their happiness at seeing Obi-Wan was broadcast in the Force. They were up and walking happily towards them, despite their missing legs and very full belly. Chava snuffled at Obi-Wan, a grey tongue licking a long stripe on his arm and over his vambrace before turning to Quinlan.
That belongs!
He had to jerk his head back to avoid a nip at them. Like many shadow-trained Padawan, he didn't wear the typical Padawan haircut since it would make undercover work difficult. The Strill settled for licking his clothes instead. Then they were both chivied under the rock table to sit up against the Strill's side.
Obi-Wan was right, it was quite prickly. Oh, yes, almost forgot. I'm supposed to give this to you.
Quinlan turned to face him and did his best to stare sternly at Obi-Wan.
Why are you trying to bulge your eyes out of your head?
Quinlan sighed. No one appreciated his Mon Calamari impression.
This is Ban's disapproving stare at one of her best friends for not contacting her to let her know you arrived safe on Bannermere, and then all the other crap that happened.
That wasn't exactly how Bant had phrased it, but Quinlan knew Obi-Wan got the gist. He had flushed at the mention of Bant's name.
Like, I know you were kidnapped twice, but there was downtime before each time. All of your friends would have appreciated knowing you were okay.
Obi-Wan looked down.
I did think about contacting them after I arrived on Bandamir, but I couldn't bear having to lie and say I was alright and happy.
Quinlan bumped his shoulder. Or your friends. You could say you were unhappy but safe, and we'd have understood. Or you could complain about how much it all sucked, and we'd also have understood.
Obi-Wan nodded but didn't speak.
Anyway, please calm Bant and the others soon so we don't both get killed by her when we get back to the temple.
She won't kill us,
said Obi-Wan. She's a trainee healer. Who knows what she'll do to make our lives miserable?
Obi-Wan chuckled at the thought, though Quinlan was only half joking. Not that Quinlan had any experience, but according to Thaume, the healers were some of the most dangerous people
in the temple. Since I'm Arab, you don't have to call me. But seriously, how are you, Obi-Wan?
Obi-Wan thought about his answer. I'm alright and heading towards good, if that makes sense.
Quinlan leaned back against the Strill, feeling something inside of him relax.
It does.